Matchmaker.fm connects podcasters and guests. Welcome to Matched, the show where we talk to some of the most incredible guests available for an interview right now. I'm your host, James Mulvany, founder of Matchmaker.fm, and this is Matched.
Hi, I'm Jarie Bolander, and you can find me on Matchmaker.fm.
Hey, Jarie, welcome to Matched. How's it going?
I was telling you a little bit before, it's kind of a mixed day, but...
Mixed day.
Yeah, but today is the 1-year anniversary of my podcast, The Entrepreneur Ethos, which is super cool. So I am excited about that. In fact, something like 24 of my guests have been from Matchmaker.fm. So I'm a fan.
Cool.
So yeah,
all right.
It's been pretty cool.
So first of all, we start each one of these interviews with like icebreakers just for fun. Mm-hmm. So if you could choose one superpower, teleportation or being able to fly, what would it be and why?
Teleportation for sure. Flying, I used to be a pilot, so I love flying, but I'd rather be like, okay, I want to go here and snap my fingers and I'm there, as opposed to the journey, So teleportation, I think, would be the one I would pick.
All right. I think I kind of agree with you there, but then also I suppose the argument of flying is you get to see things along the way. So
yeah, but I could just teleport to what I want to see and then teleport back.
That's true. Okay, cool. And what's the worst job you've ever had?
I worked at McDonald's for 3 months when I was 16 years old.
Yeah. And
that was the best job and the worst job I've ever had. I did do the morning shift at like 6. I had to be there at 6 a.m. Because that's the only thing I could get. And I'm in high school, right? Because you can imagine 6 a.m. on a Saturday and a Sunday. I'm probably not going to be in the best mood, But what that taught me was it was good and bad, right? It was a really hard job. I was fry cook and then I was at the register. But what that really taught me was just the cross-section of society that actually has that job and how hard it was and just how appreciative I was of the opportunities that I had. Because after that 3 months, I actually went to work at a drugstore because one of the guys would come through the drive-through, and he was a great guy. His name was Mr. Mann, but I got the job because my mom also worked at that McDonald's. She had worked there for a long time. And she was so kind as to say, oh, yeah, you guys looking for people to hire? My son needs a job. And he's like, yeah, Mr. Mann's like, yeah, sure. Yeah, Dave Mann. He's like, yeah, sure. So my mom got me the job because she was working there too. So it happens to also be my mom's birthday today. So happy birthday, Mom.
Happy birthday, Mom. Happy birthday, your podcast.
Yeah.
It's funny because I know lots of people who started working at McDonald's as their first job, and most people have got good things to say about it as a whole. I think, there's something to be learned, like in terms of like team morale and processes and systems. Like, wherever you go at McDonald's in the world, they've got pretty consistent, results, which I think is quite impressive, considering it's such a big organization. So, yeah.
But that set me on the journey to really appreciate hard work and all the people. Any fast food worker, any restaurant worker from that point on, I treat with the utmost respect.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's get we got that out of the way. Let's talk about your podcast. So you mentioned it's a year ago today. Maybe just to give a bit of background, if you could just introduce yourself, like what you do, how you kind of came about starting your podcast in the first place, that would be cool.
Yeah. So the name of the podcast is the Entrepreneur Ethos Podcast. It's based on the book of the same name, The Entrepreneur Ethos, that I released in 2017. And I had been like blogging over at my blog, The Daily MBA, for the better part of like 11 or 12 years. And I was getting sick of blogging, to be honest. And I was looking to figure out how to, break into being in podcasting. And I had hooked up with a guy named Kevin Jones, who is the CEO of Blue Wire Podcast Network. And it's a sports podcasting network that my entrepreneur podcast happens to be on. And the reason is because I'm an advisor and I met Kevin early on and I kind of helped him get to where he's at today. I mean, there was a lot of other people, but I sort of helped with what he was doing and, helping him get some money and stuff. And so when I was like, God, I got to start doing this podcasting thing. And I had originally been on a podcast called the Story Grid Editor Roundtable podcast, which I was one of one of 5 of us. And I did that for 5 seasons. And that was just so much fun. And the people there were just great. And we just nerded out on story.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to do was something that my own thing that I knew a lot more about. I mean, I know a ton about story, but also know a lot about entrepreneurship. I wrote the book, right? So I said, hey guys over at Blue Wire, can you let Crazy Uncle Jarie get a pod? And they're like, yeah, whatever, go ahead. Just don't blow the thing, don't blow the network up or whatever. I'm just kidding, but they were very gracious. And what was really great about that is they taught me a lot of stuff, and of course, I didn't know what I didn't know. And one of the other reasons I wanted to do the pod was to interview people because I have a hard time networking and talking to people. I'm sort of a highly functional introvert, and you probably wouldn't know that by like, wow, it doesn't sound that way, but it takes a lot of effort for me to do this.
Yeah.
And I wanted to practice talking and interviewing great entrepreneurs like yourself. You were on my show, which was just awesome because, again, I'm a big fan of what you guys do here. So, yeah, it's just sort of evolved from there. And I really wanted to get to the heart of the inner struggle with entrepreneurs and to sort of understand the traits, values, and beliefs and skills that they hold. Because I think the entrepreneur community and the entrepreneur as a career, a vocation, is really a sort of a force for good in the world. I don't think there's any other way to solve the world's problems than through entrepreneurship. And I wanted to showcase that, and I wanted people to have a voice to understand really the mentality and the mental internal struggles and, have some fun.
Yeah, cool. That sounds good. And I have a question about the podcast network, because I think the kind of concept of podcast network, some people won't be aware of them. So what would you say the advantages of joining a podcast network are? Like, why, if I'm thinking about starting a podcast, or maybe I've just launched one, why should I join a network? What is a network to you?
Yeah. So, I'll give you the example of Blue Wire. So Blue Wire is all about sports podcasts. Kevin Jones, I don't know, a couple of years ago, feels like forever, but a couple of years ago decided to start this podcast network to really put forth his thesis, which was content and talent are the most important thing for a podcast, and that the network effect, or if we all got together and we're all talking about different things but related to sports, that we could amplify each other's voice. That's one of the big advantages of being on a network, if the network is actually in the position to promote what you're doing. So as an example, Blue Wire, I think now has got 140, 150 podcasts. I actually lose track. It's growing so rapidly, but it also has original content series, things like that, branded content as well. And his thesis is still the same. He's like, look, I'm going to attract the best talent I can. I'm going to mentor, coach them. We're going to give them the best platform, and then we're going to amplify their voice.
Yeah.
And that's the huge advantage. If the network, this is a big if the network promotes its podcast. So, even though, I'm not a sports podcast, I do talk to a lot of athletes as part of my day job. And so there was a lot of ways we can help promote it. But that's essentially what it is. So, yeah, it's kind of like being part of the sports team, to be honest. Yeah. That's a really good analogy.
Cool. Okay. And you also have used Matchmaker to be a guest on other podcasts as well. I guess this kind of leads me nicely to the next question, which is, why did you join Matchmaker?
Well, how long do we have? Well, one of the challenges with being a podcast host is to find quality guests, especially if you do my show, right? Like, I talk to entrepreneurs, right? So I need a to find entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I need to find a certain type of entrepreneur and all that. And I have used a bunch of the other services, and I will not name them because I don't want to talk bad about any of them, but a lot of them were trying to do too many things.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, it's really refreshing to see a platform like Matchmaker.fm that it just focuses on, I'm going to connect the guest to the host and the host to the guest.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do one thing really well. And you do that great. I think we talked about it on my pod. I think you're at like over 20,000 people that are part of the network.
Yeah.
And that's huge. And that's the same thing as the network effect if you're on a podcasting network, right? The more people you have around you that are doing the same thing, where you can promote each other, the better. In sort of the new economy of things, as you know, ads and search and social media start to get arbitrage down to whoever's got the most money. It's really about building networks of people that are your tribe, right?
Yeah.
And
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, that's what Matchmaker does, you know?
Yeah.
And that's really important.
I think especially, you know, when you're starting out in podcasting, if you haven't got like a huge, you know, you might not know anyone. And it's sort of, it's I suppose a bit of a daunting thing of like, well, how do I create that network? And like you mentioned, if you haven't got a huge budget to promote a podcast or a big existing audience, it's really hard to kind of climb that ladder and get to the point where your show's a success, or you know, how do you go out and get your first listeners? And networking and appearing on other podcasts is a fantastic way to grow and get your message out there, I think.
It is, I think, one of the best, if not the best way. I think we did some research over at Blue Wire, and it was like, how do you find out about podcasts? And literally the highest one was, from other podcasts I listen to. So it's a great avenue for promotion. It's a great avenue for long form conversation. It's literally like what talk radio used to be back in the day. I mean, that's why sports podcasting is so huge, right? Everyone loves sports talk radio. I don't know if they had that in the UK, right? Where they'd get on and grouse about they didn't play so well. If I was there, you're like, yeah, dude, you're like got a beer belly and can't even get off the thing. But, you know, I mean, that's the beauty of this stuff. Everyone loves to be part of something. And I think, it's just a great way. Like if you start, like one of the things that's super cool is, you know, people will reach out to me on matchmaker.fm and be like, hey, I'd love for you to be a guest on my show. And I typically, you know, I don't get them that often because I don't really promote myself, but the ones I get, some of them are like, you know, kids from the Middle East that are like, I'm like their first guest or their second guest, you know, and it's like, wow, I never would have talked to you in a million years if we weren't on this platform. And it was beautiful. It's beautiful to connect, right? Especially in long form conversations, which are, I think, not like promoted as much, you know, everything's a soundbite and I'm just like, you know, I think we need to talk more together. So
I agree. And I think podcasts are great. And the stats show that, you know, they lend themselves very well to that. Like there's 75% of people listen for the entire episode, which is incredible and a great opportunity as a kind of an entrepreneur or a marketer or someone who's in kind of PR or marketing like you know, it's a great way of like having those long form conversations and being interesting as well. Like it doesn't have to just be like a sales pitch. You can talk about all kinds of different topics.
I think if you try to do it as a sales pitch, you'll fail.
Yeah,
miserably.
Absolutely.
I mean, you do a bunch of stuff on Instagram, your little snippets, and I of course follow you guys on Instagram. And I love the fact that those tidbits of advice, right? And those nice little, you know, chunks of content. I mean, you're totally right. The whole point of a podcast for a listener, in my opinion, is they actually get to know who you are. They get to hear your voice. It's different than a video. It's different than a blog post because I am captivating your ears right now. So when you're listening, you may be able to do other things, but generally you're like pretty focused on what we're talking about. And if we're not entertaining, if we're too selly, if we feel like we're a kind of douches, you're not going to listen. So
I seem to think that we are like when I was on your show, I'm pretty sure we both had we had a discussion from what I remember, and we both said some of the worst interviews we had were like people who just came on and they were just like, I'm going to sell straight away. And, that's just totally not cool. And it's really, it's a turn off as the host, and it's a turn off for the listener as well.
Well, and it's just I think the thing about like all this stuff, especially, when we're talking about podcasting and interviews, like people listen, there's like three reasons why people listen, right? To be entertained, to learn something, right? And then to have some sort of like knowledge, right? So those three things, you kind of have to understand what you're doing. None of those three things are selling for a product or service, right? Now, if you have something that will help them learn or help them go better, faster, cheaper, or whatever, that's fine. But it's always the second or third or fourth. I mean, you hardly ever bring it up, because part of it is they want to get to know you, see if they can trust you, right? They want to be able to know, like, and trust you before they take your advice. And so, yeah, agreed.
Cool. Okay. Tell us about, if you could be on any podcast in the world, which one would it be?
I have so many.
Well, give me a few.
Oh, okay. So I really like Very Bad Wizards. I think Dave and Tamler do a fantastic job of just like, they're a philosopher and a psychologist, and they talk a lot about society and meme. I mean, they're so funny, and they're so irreverent. So that'd be awesome. I'd really like to be on the Knowledge Project, which is Farnham Street. Shane Parrish. His stuff is so informative, and just, I mean, every time I listen to one of his shows, I just get better. In fact, I literally stole my kind of line. His is like, okay, it's time to listen and learn. And mine's like, okay, let's get better together. I literally like lifted it from him, his format. I wish I could, be on that. And then, I mean, I don't know. There's like a bunch of really cool one. I mean, Joe Rogan is one, if I could ever get on him, or like Oprah, or, like some of the big ones. But what I find fascinating about podcasts is that, even like, guys that like invented it, like Adam Curry, right? The old MTV VJ who would probably be like the one that sort of modernized the podcasting kind of at the beginning, right? Being on his show, or just ones where I could have just a great conversation about like what I'm interested in, what they're interested in. And those are the shows that I listen to where I think the host is super engaging, and like I learn something every time. And that's just so beautiful. Like that's why I love to listen to podcasts, right? Just to learn.
Yeah. Okay. And what advice would you give to someone who is thinking of starting their own show?
Well, that's a great question. And literally today, I dropped a solo podcast episode on how I consistently created podcast episodes over the last year. So it's fresh in my mind.
1 year anniversary.
1 year anniversary. So like I said, I'm talking to like the best platform for getting guests on the planet. So this is so cool. I'm excited about this. This is all pulls together. So its consistency is really important on a podcast, getting your process down.
Yeah.
One of many great advice I got from Peter Moses and Kevin Jones over at Blue Wire was, record 5 episodes to have a buffer. Make sure you're consistent, like an episode a week. Pick a topic that's broad enough that you can like explore it, right? You don't want to be too narrow. You can always narrow down, but you want your topic to really have a lot of breadth and that you could always find guests for.
That's good advice.
Yeah, get on a platform like matchmaker.fm to find guests if you need guests. And for an entire year, don't worry about the numbers. Just create your craft, grind it out, right? I mean, and then maybe eventually after a year, you get on matchmaker.fm's podcast. How cool is that?
Cool. Jarie, thanks very much. If people want to find out more about you and they want to listen into your podcast, where can they find that?
Yeah, so theentrepreneurethos.com is where I put all the podcast episodes. It's also on Simplecast. It's on Apple, Spotify. Just look up the Entrepreneur Ethos. It's all there. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at the Daily MBA. And you can also connect to me on matchmaker.fm if you want to. Not too promote-y. See how we put that all in?
Subtle little pitch.
Well, I can't help it. I love what you guys do. I mean, it's no joke. I mean, I talk about it all the time on my pod. Just listen and you'll know it's no joke. I'm being authentic because it really serves. It's just this huge gap, right? And it's hard to find guests. It's hard to connect. It's just so I always look for tools to make my life easier, because the other bit of advice in order to be consistent is enjoy the workflow and make the workflow as frictionless as possible. And that includes setting up all your systems so that you don't have to worry about getting guests. I think I'm booked now through June, and we're in March, right? So
wow,
it's pretty cool.
Jarie, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
There is an easier way to get booked onto more podcasts as a guest. Join matchmaker.fm for free today and start making connections with podcasters who are looking for guests just like you.